Hey everybody, welcome back to Post Status Draft. I've got a really special interview from a very long time friend and colleague in WordPress, Jake Goldman, we from 10up fame. Jake, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and we're going to talk about really great news we've heard on this in our community, our space, our industry about 10up specifically, the company you founded over 12 years ago. But I was just thinking as I was saying all that, I think we actually met before you started 10up in Boston when you were running WordCamp Boston. So I think your and I's relationship predates 10up days, but I've seen over the last 12 plus years, whatever it's been, this very strategic progress and good work in WordPress over the years. Now we know it as 10up. But anyway, Jake, would you take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, and I guess I'm still selling into how I introduce myself now.
Yeah.
So I think I'm probably known in our community as the president and the founder of 10up, the digital agency that does a lot of professional services, especially in the enterprise and sort of the larger business space, where we have been about 300 people. We've sort of crossed over in the last year $40 million a year in revenue. Again, overwhelmingly services with a lot of little open source projects on the side, a lot of popular plugins and solutions. Couple of little SaaS services we've developed along the way. Some people might know us for Elastic Press, if you're into Elasticsearch in WordPress. I've been making a web since there was a web to make, since the sort of mid 90s when I was in high school and tinkering with making club websites as the nerd in my school. And then went into services, doing, working for contractors, whatever you want to label them, working for very small businesses, some larger businesses, doing services from an engineering standpoint, from sort of a user experience design standpoint, from a business and sales standpoint. I always got pulled into those conversations because I guess I'm good at listening to myself talk, which is, I guess, part of sales. So that entire journey leading up to forming 10up in 2011, and then spending all of my professional energy over that last decade, that last 12 years building the company. And now I am trying on the title of partner at 10up plus Fueled, which I guess is the big news we're talking about. And I'm still not sure I'm quite yet used to what to call myself, or calling myself just partner instead of president, but that's where I am today.
That's fantastic. Well, I wanted to talk about the merger. There's a LinkedIn post that'll be on the show notes. You can read Jake's background there. I want to that is the big news, a merger with Fueled. We've talked a little bit before this, just how that all happened and what you're looking forward to. But could you share that big news?
Yeah, so the big exciting news is that we are merging in with a company called Fueled. Fueled is a company that makes some of, in my opinion, the best mobile apps for iOS and Android out there. Also has done some pretty impressive custom web applications and web experiences for companies like even New York Times and Wall Street Journal. Not quite usually as much in the publishing enablement kind of space, but in sort of the user experience, like an event site for Wall Street Journal. I know my eyebrows went up when we were having conversations with them because I'm a big Warby Parker fan. I wear contact lenses usually when I'm on things like podcasts or out and about, but I have absolutely terrible vision. I'm a -5, and best glasses I ever bought, best experience buying glasses I ever bought. They made that application. You can go to their website. You'll probably find a lot of applications you've used or you're familiar with, and there's a ton more that they don't even put on their website that they can't even talk about publicly. So we've been working together for a little while. We got to know them earlier this year. We both had this immediate sense of not only do we have this very organic chemistry where it feels like we would welcome any of these people that we've been meeting with into our own homes, into our own houses, and felt like they were great additions to our team, but really had this moment of we're both trying to build something bigger. We're both trying to add on to more value. We're both cognizant of a changing landscape. We both feel like the targets we want to go after are the Deloittes and the Accentures and the Code and Theories that really, they're not the app company that can push into other, solutions. They solve a part of the problem. We're sort of the CMS and WordPress and, side of the equation. But if you're talking about full digital transformation, we've long felt that we're missing some components to really aggressively go after we just solve the entire digital problem for you. So I think it became pretty clear pretty quickly that there's a really good fit here, that we could really help each other go up to the next level. I, for a lot of reasons we'll probably get into, felt like it was a good time for me to think about not being a sole proprietor, having other partners that I could work with. And so, yeah, where, they're about 125 or 130 people as of the date of the merger. So combined, we're about 420 or 430 or so as a full-time staff. And I'm energized.
Yeah, as you should be, and congratulations again. And for the space, I feel like I know maybe outside WordPress industry, agencies merging or being acquired is definitely is a thing. In our space, it's one of the most significant I've known about in my time in the space with agency. So those, and then you unpacking what Fuel does, in understanding a little bit of what Tenet does, it totally makes sense to be able to offer a complete package. But yeah, hey, you touched on something I'd love to know, like the why, because you've ran 10 up and grown 10 up to a point as the sole person. I know you pulled on John Eklund years ago, which, by the way, I thought was brilliant because of the self-awareness I could anticipate of going, maybe somebody else could do this instead of trying to do it all yourself. And I feel like, having known John too, like that seems to have really worked out well. But a lot of founders go, okay, I'm just going to do can't get past probably their own self. And you did with John. But I'd love to hear a little bit about that. The why, solo proprietor for this great company that was doing really good revenue and work in the world. That, and then get into what does that future hold for you, TNAP, and the bigger enterprise?
Yeah, the John Eckman, who is still our CEO some 9 years later, bless his soul, still puts up with me as working this business together, is a good one to bring up. Just, I think, plant the seed, because I think the immediate reaction can be the founder wants to take some step back, wants to relinquish some power. Clearly, that guy just is ready to go out the door, and that's not at all where my headspace has been. The way that I think about it, maybe it's a little too pop psychology, but like, I think of myself as probably, if you say you had to choose like one definition of yourself in terms of career, like what is your skill set? What do you do? You pick one word. Like, I don't think I'd pick entrepreneur. Maybe tempting now is being a little closer to what I actually do with my time, but I think of myself as an engineer, sort of hard. Like, where I got into the space was tinkering with making websites. What I did in my first years doing consulting was programming. Now, back then, I think it was a little bit more into like UX and design. There wasn't these sharp distinctions we have now. It was a bit of like, the webmaster kind of days that solved everything, but more than anything, sort of engineer. And I've always thought like what is fulfilling about engineering, what a great engineer does is they make something, they make it really good, and it does not depend on them to keep running. So one of the most fulfilling things to me outside of building 10 up are like the plugins that I built that I know in some cases millions of people are using and that I don't even touch anymore. To me, that's success. Somebody's day is made a little bit better by something I made, by something I built, and it doesn't require my time and my energy for them to have that fulfillment, have that success. So that's a very long prelude to. I've always felt the same way about what it means to be successful building a company. The perfect company, the perfect larger business is one that is not depending on its founder to keep running it. It's one that can thrive and succeed well beyond the ego and the of that founder. So like to go back to your example, like when I brought John on, that was not me saying I don't want to be involved anymore. 2 years, I can't do this anymore. That was me recognizing what are the limits of my capabilities? Where do I need help? Where do I recognize where this business will be held back if I think I can just do it all? And I very much see this in the same light. So, no surprise, didn't wake up in August and be like, who do I want to merge with? And a month later happened. This has been a journey for me. So I've entertained these conversations going back years and years. I would say the last couple of years, I started getting pretty serious about that conversation. I mean, could probably overthink, like the 2020s have not exactly been there's probably been some influence of events of the last few years of one's sense of what do I need to do next? How do we keep changing? How do we keep evolving? But I very much had this palpable sense of like, in many ways, particularly in those years, like being in business, being in a competitive space is getting even harder. And we keep growing. We're now breaking through 40 million. We're now breaking through 300 people coming up. And I had this real sense of like, I am fairly financially conservative. I am, was not particularly wealthy outside of like paper wealth, outside of 10 up. Like, I'm not the guy who's going to be like, let's restructure and do different kind of equity programs and let's go make acquisitions to get us to the next stage. Like, I needed partnership to do that. I also felt like to keep competing, to keep growing, we really needed to transcend beyond being one of the biggest, maybe arguably the biggest WordPress, very centric, focused kind of agency. Really needed to go beyond there to like, just how do we get to that? How do we get to those conversations that some of those biggest players are in? That is not, I have decided maybe WordPress is one of the tools I want to use. Now let's have a conversation about whether you're the best one to make it. I have more conversations that are, all I know is my digital experience isn't working for me anymore. I no longer feel like I'm competitive. I'm not doing something right in the digital space. Maybe and not just people that are web only, but people that have in-store experiences, people that are thinking about like, we're working right now on a project for like a large, with Fueled on a large like amusement park group. And like the question is not, I don't want to be at the table when it's, okay, maybe WordPress, who do we talk to? I want to be at the table when they're asking, we're not keeping up. How do we rethink top to bottom digital experience? And I felt like we needed to add more capabilities. We need to be a little less of a one-trick pony in terms of our experience to be able to get from here to there. I feel like I'm probably rambling a little bit, but I guess the point here is like, I was starting to really sense my own limits. I was starting to get a real sense again, just like 9 years ago when I brought on John, a real sense of 10up's going to be held back by me. Getting to 50 million to 80 million, maybe 100 million some days, keep growing and keep giving opportunities to this team to make sure this team is secured and taken care of as, technology preferences changes, as larger projects, come on board. And so to me, it just felt like the most natural answer that would also keep me motivated, engaged, inspired, feeling like I'm enjoying my life, was not to become the finance guy, not to become the legal guy, not to become the professional businessman that it takes to do that, but to join forces with some organizations that could give me that partnership, share some of that ownership and that risk taking with me and get me from point A to point B.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, and I think you're sharing your thought process too, which is awesome. And when you said, I think of myself as an engineer, that totally tracks with who I know of you. When I ask you a question, I'm always going to get a really good, balanced answer about it, and you're not afraid to be honest either. And but I see that too when you've kind of unpacked a little bit more Fuel does and the capital partners that are part of the deal, and you have a future that you're a part of and invested in personally, because something you create from your own to grow to that, it takes something pretty significant, compelling wise, to make those decisions.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about some of the work, because I know you're doing some. You all have historically, from my recollection, please correct me, worked with a lot of publishers. Over the years, taking WordPress to the enterprise and at scale. There's a big conversation about AI today. I know you all have done some work over that. And so tell me about some of the things that are exciting to you about what you all are doing today too, and then going forward at 10up and the bigger.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many exciting projects at 10up. I mean, sort of list off a few, maybe if they tickle your fancy to dig deeper into, we can spend more time on them. You mentioned AI for sure. We have a plugin called ClassifAI, spelled AI at the end. We can drop it in your show notes or something like that. If you look up probably 10up and AI, it'll probably pop up right up. It's a free plugin. You have to pay if you want to plug in, pay the end service providers if you want to get all the features. So for example, if you want to take advantage of some of the image generation features or advanced ChatGPT features, you have to pay them to get an API key that you can plug into. We don't make any direct money off of the solution. It's a free open source solution that is our sort of R&D experimentation space for how can we take advantage of these AI technologies to really enable publishing workflows, content creation workflows inside of WordPress. One of the things I worry about in general in this space, which I'm sure a conversation we might get to later, is can open source platforms keep up in this rapidly changing computing world with cloud and SaaS services that can just throw more hardware and solve all these complexities of how do you bind complex hardware requirements to software? That's a lot trickier when you're downloading a zip file. You can upload to any host in the world. So I worry about problems like, can WordPress be competitive in a new AI world where it's not just a full stack that's solved for you? So in addition to solving problems for our immediate customers, ClassifAI is really a contribution back to the community in the sense that I want anybody to be able, in the WordPress space, to be able to say, when your customer says, small company, large company, your friend next door building a coffee shop, what do you do? Are you doing anything with these new AI technologies, taking advantage of anything offered by ChatGPT or OpenAI services, I want them to be able to say, yeah, no problem. There's this free plugin. There's some free services we can tap into to do things if you're not doing it at a huge scale. There's some pretty reasonably priced paid services if you want to do cooler things like generate your images instead of having to go buy a bunch of like copy, stock photography or do, pay a photographer. So that's a very long-winded way, I suppose, of saying what we're excited about there is not only what it's doing for our customers, but that I hope this is the kind of solutions we like to build where it solves a problem facing this software. I think in the future, it provides a solution.
Yeah. Well, I want to, you kind of swayed into my next question. You've got a lot of experience in WordPress on the web doing digital work at scale. Yeah. And I want to transition just to ask that question, and reserve the right to ask you to come back about more AI too, because there's a lot of change and innovation happening that doesn't always feel, if you're a business in the space, okay, good at the moment, but there's something happening, right? But specifically, I want to ask you about, you've been in WordPress so long, you've been a part of the community. Like I said, like we go back to when you were organizing working at Boston back in the day. Yeah. But you've seen this growth, you work with these big companies, and your company specifically, you've dedicated resources in your post. You mentioned your company is the number 2 contributor behind Automatic. And that's really compelling me to ask the question, what are you seeing with WordPress? Specifically with your clients, overall in the bigger landscape. I'm really curious to hear your perspectives on WordPress and where we're at today.
Yeah, we're going to be recording this podcast for the next 3 hours, right? So we can get
right.
Yeah, I'll try. I will defy my nature and try to be a little concise about it. I think there are things that have me excited about WordPress. I see a lot of innovation in the hosting space around tools and solutions. One of the wonderful things that remain about WordPress is it is so popular that there's a bit of like let a thousand flowers bloom. So some of these large providers and hosting platforms in particular are doing really innovative things and sort of choosing your flavor of WordPress, whether that's a full headless complete solution. So for example, one example that springs to mind is if WP Engine's your flavor, they have a whole Atlas stack. So if you're trying to use WordPress as a open source and sort of free CMS, and you need to figure out how to use your front-end React developers, there's a solution for that. If you're more of a prosumer, I want to build my own site, there are solutions for that, be it on WordPress.com or be it some of these larger hosts that are like adopting some tools other people are making to like sort of streamline how Gutenberg works, give you more templated setups, more use case based templates to start with. So the thing that makes me bullish about WordPress is there's clearly a lot of buy-in from a lot of large organizations. And because it is not centralized, you can sort of have dozens of experiments running with what does this need to be to different audiences and still have the software bloom and grow up. I also think it is a positive thing. These are probably the conversations we had back in that 2010 timeframe. I also think it's a positive thing that I think WordPress has moved beyond what I would say is an overcommitment to don't rock the boat with version releases. And what I mean by that is there was a stretch of time for me, I would say maybe more 20, we're doing our old guys archaeology here, 2012 to 2016, where it just felt like we're so afraid to make any change that might break something somewhere in someone's workflow that we're going to stagnate. So I've written posts about like, let's be a little less timid about, let's not just throw away the importance of compatibility, but like some site somewhere might have had some function that expected to behave some way. Let's get a little bit less timid about those kind of situations. So while you can certainly look at things like, certainly look at some of the major changes in WordPress, particularly the editor, and certainly feel a different kind of sense of fatigue of what do I expect next release? I think ultimately the software needed to move into that mindset of let's change quickly, let's iterate quickly, let's add new features if we're going to be competitive. And I'm glad to see that energy in the software. Things that worry me about WordPress, I think I mentioned a little bit in the AI conversation. I worry that as the end user experience gets easier and easier with some of these platforms, the things that make it easier and easier are harder to replicate with open source. So AI was the example that I used. You can't just build a whole machine learning AI generative model inside a piece of PHP software that you can install in any host and expect that it's just going to run and it's just going to work from the bottom of the market all the way to the top of the market. That's a very hard problem to solve. Whereas if you're just running on a cloud like Squarespace or Webflow or even Wix or something like that, you just bake it into your SaaS service. You just add it on. You add the computing hardware. You add the configuration. You don't have to worry about anybody. Somebody might be running this on a shared server, doing 100 page views a month, and it's just there. And you, as the consumer, probably may not care much about all of the philosophy about GPL. All you know is that your experience is this just got easier and better the next day, and it wasn't a problem for me. So AI is just one example. I mean, there are many other examples of like the performance and the kind of computing hardware you need to do things like, what we're trying to do with Gutenberg, real drag and drop with animations and transitions and have that perform well on the front end. So I do worry about, for the open source project, can we stay relevant in 10 years if the kind of like hard things that consumers who don't care about the backstory or the community, that consumers care about, that are hard to do with downloadable open software. I think another challenge for WordPress, and I've probably been on this boat for a long time, is I think it still struggles a little bit for all of the great aspirations of we want to, I don't know what we want, 80%, 100% of websites. I don't even know what our target is anymore at 43%. We want the majority of websites running WordPress. I think one of the challenges we still have is, an old mentor of mine used to say, one size fits all fits no one particularly well. That worries me a little bit as well. Maybe apropos of the same point I was making earlier, like the kind of features you need to build in. I worry a little bit sometimes when I talk to other groups and go outside of our WordPress community, talk to just enterprise CTOs and enterprise CMS groups, and go to these, there are these like industry events that are not just WordPress, but like business and CMS, business and DXP kind of events, or just web builder kind of events. I get a bit of a sense of like, if what you want, two different parallel directions the industry is taking, okay? If what you want is, this should be easier and simpler, but I don't have as much control, I should be able to go in and my web building experience should be something like Adobe InDesign or Photoshop++. I should be able to create something without having to write PHP code or advanced JavaScript. I should be able to create what 80% of websites want and need on their website, and do so without a degree in how to write computer software, without having to understand server-side code or security risks. Maybe you have to know a little bit of front end, but maybe not all the SaaS preprocessors and all the ways we've made front end complicated too. I think if you want that solution, make this easy, make this simple, make this repeatable, what maybe the front pages of or Dreamweavers of yore wanted to be, but just the technology wasn't ready. Technology feels more ready. There are some pretty impressive solutions out there. If you're trying to build a one-pager, if you're trying to build your coffee shop's website, get something pretty damn good looking without putting a lot of effort. I don't think WordPress is very competitive in that space anymore. Could I earnestly step back and say, you just opened a coffee shop, you want to spin up a website, you want it to look pretty and have some pictures and have a menu on there and have a contact page and get some analytics about who's visiting it. You don't have a budget to hire a programmer to do it, or maybe your nephew's tech savvy. Would you recommend WordPress?
Right.
Not sure. It may be, because I have a certain set of values. I'm not sure I could easily do so. Then the flip side, there's the other extreme end of the market, another major trend going on right now, which is like CMS as a very decoupled, very structured data, like the head, or the front end, very much detached fully from the back end with the full suite, where the back end is not like lay out a page like that other extreme we talked about, but is more like I have a menu for 100 restaurants. I need very structured data that's not making 100 page layouts to say, these are the prices, these are the dates where prices change, right? Very structured content coming onto your screen, and very structured. And there's a lot of CMSs and a lot of platforms doing good innovative work in there. And there's, without getting into the weeds, there's a lot of there's a lot of good arguments for that kind of use case, especially when you're talking about the biggest companies, right? Not their blogs, not their newsrooms, not their little content marketing side pages, but their main enterprise presence on the web, where there's a good argument for that. That is a popular belief in the CTOs. Kind of like the page building, WordPress can do that, has a RESTful API, has an ability to be headless. Is it the best solution if you're a CTO for going full decoupled, full structured data? Once again, I have to be honest, like there are cases where the answer might be yes. It's a hard argument to make. And so WordPress, I still feel like has this kind of like funny positioning where it's a little bit of trying to have its foot in each camp. It's a little bit of, oh, we can be a headless CMS and platform. It can be a page builder experience for those who want it, but it's so sort of thinly spread in terms of trying to roll up everybody that I worry that it's not becoming the best solution for the CTO who wants a modern decoupled platform. It's not the best solution for the small business owner or the people whom WordPress really served a decade ago. What's the easiest, fastest way to get something stood up as quality? I worry in that dynamic that it can get squeezed as a platform. I maybe worry, frankly, I worry for 10 up about the high end of the market. It's probably partly why we want to merge. We want to be at that table where we can bring WordPress into more conversations because we're not waiting for the decision to be made about technology to make a case for our platforms. Short term, I worry a little bit more about that in terms of the agencies and the enterprise agencies and WordPress space continuing to thrive and grow. 10-year kind of vision for WordPress, I worry more about the former case. I worry that so many people in this WordPress ecosystem found their way here, built a passionate career here, because WordPress provided such an easy ladder to climb for people who aren't professional programmers and professional engineers and professional developers to get in, to experiment, to build something on a tight budget, on a shoestring without a lot of licensing fees. I'm not as sure we have that ladder anymore. I'm not as sure if you're starting out and you're a tinkerer and you're an experimenter and you're the person that maybe didn't go to school or couldn't afford to go to school for 4 years, but can kind of learn your way through it. I'm not quite as sure that WordPress is as approachable. It is the default option you go to in the way that it was 10 years ago. So sorry if I warned you about the 3-hour thing. Just rambling, but that's, I guess, my lens on where we are today.
It's really good perspective. And why I want to ask that question too is there's so many people in our post-status community and then the broader WordPress that are in spaces I've never dwelt, which is what does it take for New York Times, Washington Post or some other organization to get what they're trying to get done with WordPress, and what are those unique pitfalls? And I've heard and I agree with this and I see it, even if I haven't experienced it myself, I go, oh, I get it. That's the tension we're going to have to figure out and navigate through as a broader open source software community. Is okay, we have a broad vision. Everything has changed and evolved from when it was, because I started out was one of those people coming from Dreamweaver, whatever, over into WordPress, being able to use that and seeing that I've kind of looked at it as more the down, the bottom of the market. I've got a business and I want to put my website up. There's really compelling options, as you indicated. And I think there are these threats at these different levels, specifically when we think about web development work for clients, that we need to be talking about more and more. So I appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah, you bet.
So my next question is more broader, and it is the concept of the open web that, we see billionaires buying big social media companies, making some decisions that we don't always agree with and go, oh, wow. But there's this premise, particularly post-status and myself, is and all of us that embrace and love WordPress, contribute to it, is we want the web to be open. There's good, really valid reasons for the web to be open, for someone to be able to share their thoughts, opinions, however crazy or sound or whatever in between it might be out there, that we want that for future generations. But if you just, as someone has been in this field for a very long time, seen these types of changes, been involved in them, when I just say the word open web, even decoupled from WordPress, where do you see the web today and where is it going? You mentioned AI. That's a big conversation. Social has, within our careers alone, become a dominant force in the web, which are mostly closed, dictated by other people with business interests. What are you seeing there in the open web?
It's such a good question. When you say that, what I'm reflecting on is like, I damn it, I tried Mastodon. I wanted to believe, and I just couldn't. right? In terms of like the complexity of what it was trying to solve, and just like the overall experience. I mean, mind you, no shock, probably the listeners of this podcast, I'm not the most social guy on social channels, so the effort I put in might have been somewhat lacking. But I think what it speaks to when you talk about those social platforms is very, again, relevant to my point about like bigger, harder expectations that are harder to achieve with things that are open. Social is a great example of where there are benefits you can achieve when you are closed and at scale and controlling everything end to end, software experience, the hardware underneath it, that are remarkably hard to do when you're entirely open source and it's a bit of cobble it together, every different piece that you want to use. In terms of like, I'm trying to think about the answer to your question. I mean, it's hard not to be of two minds. On one hand, it's hard to. We are in a renaissance, I would say, of open source in terms of the most low-lying technologies that enable developers. Like Linux won the game, right? For being hardware, right? Not the hardware, the OS layer, right? Closer to the hardware. Almost all of the major platforms that you use now are using open source. I mean, even Apple open sourced Swift, their developer toolkit. Now, we have to be careful because, like, relevant to conversations that often go on in WordPress, open source and community owned are different concepts. So I don't want to necessarily say like community owned projects are thriving in the same way, but truly open source software solutions, in the sense that the code is truly out there, anybody can do a pull request, anybody can see how it was built, anybody can see how it works. You can go into the code, look deep, and figure out what's going on when I try to compile this part of my software, what's actually making this thing show up on the screen. At the low level, at the developer enablement level, there's more open source than ever. I think if the conversations you had back in 2004, it's like open source, that's a security threat, and so businesses will never do open source because you can find the holes in the software, and right, you're exposing to everybody how your whole software. I mean, that's just dead, right? As an argument, I mean, you look at any major company, Microsoft, which owns GitHub, right, and puts tons of open source, has won in terms of the argument of like, this is safe, this is good for low-lying, super geekery, like low-lying, Linux, Nginx, Apache, right? Like, AWS mostly runs, its most popular services are open source solutions running on top of their hardware. I think when you go up the next layer, which is like UI facing experiences built to scale, things built on top of that technology, I think that's where I would get more concerned when you talk about that like something like WordPress, something at the actual end consumer experience of using software. That's where I think the future is shakier, because it's harder for that stuff to scale. If you're ultimately trying to solve the problem, say with WordPress, of I want to make it easy to make a website, that is more a consumer, professional, prosumer, marketer kind of problem. Not the crowd that probably wants to hear a lecture from me about the importance of GPL for the future of humanity. In fact, if I gave them that lecture, they'd probably run faster to the other solution or just fall asleep. They just want a solution that works. They don't want to have to get into the weeds, and it is harder to scale, harder to explain, harder to give that audience something that's just open and say, run with it. The super nerds that are actually building those platforms are happy that once they get it, are happy to use open source at the next layer down. Again, the PHP, Node.js, React, like the developer toolkits, because they're the smart people that actually have to understand what they're building. So I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I guess I'd say in the big picture, bullish on open source. In fact, maybe you could even argue open source has taken over in many ways, certainly far more popular, accepted than it was 20 years ago. But for the most consumer, prosumer, marketer facing of experiences, maybe the place where WordPress sits in some use cases, I think getting increasingly harder to scale those solutions to meet that market.
Yeah, I mean, I totally see it. And there's a differentiation you've been able to clarify within me here too, is from a tool and building something. But when I go back to, when I started my company in 2008, the Wix, Weebly, Squarespaces, these other tools didn't exist. And no one cared about what was underlying those. They just were trying to I want to get a website up, and this is the best way to do it. Things have changed. The web has evolved, as life will. And it's a question I continue to ask myself, and then others, smart people like yourself, of like, where do we go from here? it did, like you said, it enabled a lot of the business industry within WordPress to thrive, to grow. The thing I kind of come back to is that open web, that end user experience. Now, there's plenty of people at those platforms we talked about that aren't on the front end open source. They're paid things you get into. They promise really great experiences for those people to get that end result. And that day's changed. So you've kind of come up with a question I'm trying to think for myself now, which is, what are we really trying to preserve in the future? I always give my kids the best example is I want what the spirit of these things to exist for them. Business for sure, but that's not WordPress. That's everything. The ability to put your shingle out, roll out a service, be your own boss, quote unquote. But then, when we get into free speech and openness of the web, that's a whole host of other conversations in there. So that's a really
to a degree, it's hard not to feel like the ship may have sailed. So it's sort of like, it's probably a terrible metaphor, but it's the one that springs to mind. It's like, I'm thinking of like Second Amendment arguments, right? Like we could get real hot button issues here, right? Like, if your theory on Second Amendment gun ownership rights, I'm not going to even insert my own opinion, but if your theory on gun ownership rights is the government, when the Constitution is written, the government may get out of hand, may get corrupt on its people, and we have the right to overthrow a corrupt government. Makes a ton of sense when it's written and first comes out. Why couldn't, there's no special power the government has in terms of its muskets and horses compared to the, and at some point you turn a corner where you're like, that's not a thing anymore. Nobody's going to overthrow our government military force because they own personal handguns and rifles. I don't think we're going to let people own, personal nukes on their yard. We're not going to let people own tanks, right? Like armored tanks, right, in their house. There's no cobbling together a force that's going to overthrow our military. And that's a very terrible metaphor to say, like, the ship has kind of sailed on like open source as the answer to free speech. I think maybe in the extreme, but like, even if you can have a piece of software like WordPress that is open, like we have seen cases where WordPress sites have been shut down. Whatever you think of this, because they're on a host. Those hosts are not open source. The hosts are not, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, name somebody for me that's like spinning up servers in their garages running open source software to reach a mass market message. It's just not, I guess you could, just not really a thing anymore. So there was a huge, whatever your opinion is on this, I don't really want to wade into, like, I know my personal beliefs on, like, there was a huge kerfuffle with like Pantheon a while ago, running WordPress, free open source software. Supposedly, we're going to argue the free speech software where nobody can just shut you down. And, you could argue that they could those owners could shop it around, but there was a huge controversy as the host. Should they shut down sites that are hosting in WordPress? The other host said we wouldn't let that. We wouldn't take those sites. Is WordPress really solving that problem? I'm not sure. I'm not sure saying just like open source solves the free speech problem. Like content ownership, yes. Right? Ability to fork away or, not be beholden to what the, even if not upgrade your version or something, not be beholden to the central. Yes. Lots of good reasons for GPL and open source software. But I think we maybe want to be a little bit more, it's the wrong choice of words, but just like thoughtful about the notion that open source equates to free speech control. Is Mastodon more free speech centered than as a decentralized platform than X or Twitter or whatever it's called now? I'm not sure. It could be, but there's also plenty of instances that are very heavily moderated and much more aggressive.
Well, like with the Mastodon, you mentioned something here and help me clarify it in my mind is, in 2008, 2010, whatever it was, your expression was probably putting a blog out or something, let's say blog post. Now it's definitely changed and evolved where a Mastodon or a Twitter or some social network, like I can put my thoughts out there. And I think what you help crystallize for me is that things have changed and evolved as it has, where stuck in those, that's where mind is. It's going back there and go, I need to update that today and go, what is it today? I wanted to mention this when you said Mastodon. you have technical background experience, whether you feel you can do some of those things today or not. I never had, but I go, it's the barrier is too hard there. Now we're kind of getting into this more social side of the open web, perhaps. But my hope is that continues on, and I hope WordPress can contribute to it. We have like when you say the percentage of the web that runs WordPress, and I do in my everyday life, I go, there's got to be some potential there, and I hope we continue to ask that question. Because of our past in WordPress, we have contributed to this idea of freedom. Now it's morphed. Now we need to take that spirit, that contribution, wherever it goes next. And somewhere in this space over here, I think there's still a place for that. And I hope we lead as a community. It's our background. It's our history. I would even dare say heritage of doing these things that enabled the others to go, wow, we can come in, we can do something maybe better than what WordPress did at that time. Now we have these competitors, but
I think that's
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's true. I think, I think we can. I think there's a, I sort of shoot from the hip at my hazard, but I think there's a world where WordPress becomes a bit, dare I say, IBM about itself, which is to say, like, if we think WordPress is going to go back to 2011 and be for the hip new developer, the easiest way to launch a website, not sure I bet on that. In terms of, do we think WordPress can be a lower lying, maybe less interesting platform? Going back to the beginning of this conversation, that the big hosts, the big nerds providing solutions can use as a platform to do at a more effective cost basis than rewriting your own software, to do some really interesting, do a really good job of serving different use cases, there I'd be more bullish. Do I think like these different hosts, WordPress.com, WP-Engine, all these different hosts, GoDaddy, do I think all of these different hosts, in the same way that hosting companies could use Linux versus, say, licensing IIS, to have a much more cost-effective way to get to all of their own thousand flowers blooming? Most people aren't interested in talking about, Apache or Nginx versus IIS, but it's become behind the scenes a critical tool. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I can very much see a world where for large enterprises, large platform companies, large hosting companies, WordPress is less interesting, less talked about underlying infrastructure that powers all kinds of different web building experiences, some targeted at enterprise and decoupled use cases, and focused on that experience, some targeted at the best page build, best block components and the best pre-built themes for those components, and very targeted at those use cases. I think that's a world where WordPress can keep thriving and keep pulling in different directions. I just don't know that it's, the future is people are excited to, I guess they think about it differently. They think about it more as I go to WP-Engine and Atlas, to use that example again. That's my brand experience, happens to use WordPress as its underlying technology, right? Framework. I go to the GoDaddy page build, or pick your host. I'm picking ones that think of clients if I come to mind first. I'm going to go to those platforms, right? But that relationship is maybe more with GoDaddy, who has a whole page builder experience and has a whole theme experience than particularly being interested in the fact that it's WordPress.
Well, thank you, Jake. This has been compelling. I'll be chewing on some of these things too. And I go back to where we started the conversation, which is your merger. Congratulations again. Looking forward to hearing what you all will do as even a bigger entity will be doing on the web and in our world. Anything else that we left out that you want to share?
I think we covered all the bases. I'm grateful for your congratulations. I know you've been through that experience and went through your own journey on the product side. So it means even more coming to me from those entrepreneurs. And congratulations, by the way, to yourself for bringing on a new partner in your business.
You bet. We'll go far together, right?
We do.
Well, Jake, thanks so much for being on and sharing your perspectives, and then the news of what you're doing. We'll be watching everything goes forward. And again, and one more thanks too is I want to accentuate this. You made a decision early on, sure, and I know it affected and helped with the business, but you made a heart-centered approach to me to contribute to WordPress. So, and this thing, the reason that it brought all of us together. Well, thanks everybody for listening in today. We'll see you next episode.